Welcome to another episode of the Chief Strategy Officer podcast, where we peek inside the strategy offices of the world's most admired companies and learn from their experiences in tackling complex challenges, navigating disruptive technologies, and driving impactful growth. In this episode, we are joined by Claudio Finol, Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at Fyffes, one of the world's oldest and most iconic produce companies. If you've ever bought bananas, pineapples, or melons at your grocery store, there is a good chance they came at some point through Fyffes. While fruit may look simple on the shelf, the supply chain behind it is anything but. Now, you may be asking, what does fruit have to do with my industry? I'm in healthcare, technology, financial services, facility services, or waste management. Well, actually quite a lot, because the central topic that we dive into here is this question that every company in every industry is asking, or should be asking. With the proliferation of data and the ability to share this data through advances in APIs, how should my company use that data to create an advantage? To use it to support your core business? To create new data-driven revenue streams? Claudio takes us deep into an industry that is as old as civilization itself, yet is on the cutting edge of this data revolution. With smart farms and companies like Deere & Co. turning tractors into data aggregation platforms, Claudio urges strategy leaders to look beyond the product in their hand and see the strategic opportunities that lie within data. Some of the questions that we cover are, how do you think about the central question? When do you sell the data, or when do you use it to create a proprietary advantage? How can traditional industries like agriculture use data to move along and even reshape Michael Porter's productivity frontier? What organizational and cultural shifts are required to become truly data ready? Ladies and gentlemen, Claudio Finol. Claudio, it's great to have you, and I'm excited about what we want to talk about. I'm really interested in agriculture, and we're going to get to talk about some interesting stuff that you're doing, that you're seeing around data and digitization. So thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. It's amazing to talk about this, to me, very passionate topic, because it's all about opportunities, right? Especially for a company like mine that is, it's a very traditional focused type of company. Has been there for ages, right? For
Yep.
decades and centuries. So I think there's an opportunity for some disruption in my industry.
Yeah. Maybe to bring people a little bit into the world from which you're beginning this conversation, the produce industry is something that touches everyone. Go into the grocery store, but we kind of see the end result of that. Like we pick up the fruit, the vegetable. What does Fyffes do to get us that food in our hand? And what's something surprising about the industry that most people don't know?
Mm-hmm. One thing about Fyffes is that we really focus on exotic fruits, right? So we enter into the supermarket all year round, right? Compared to those produce that come into very specific time of the year, like strawberries or melons and so on. We do have an all year round offer to a supermarket. And that means that we produce in tropical countries, and then we sell in Europe, North America, and in other places, right? That's a core of Fyffes. And Fyffes has been traditional. It's more than 100-year company.
Wow.
But like many of these type of companies, right? Like I will not mention names, but competitors have been there also for a very long time. And funny enough, the model has been traditionally very, very stagnant. In the case of Fyffes, for example, it has been traditionally more of a trading organization and has been transitioned to more producer. And also the competitors have come from maybe food producer to more traders. We have all come to some sort of a midpoint where there's a hybrid model. That's the way I see it, right? Perhaps some other person will have a different view, but the hybrid model comes from the realities of today's world. We live in a VUCA world, not to use so much that term, but we operate in countries where, stability is not the norm, but also we operate with all the vulnerabilities of climate change, right? So to guarantee that yearly offer to a supermarket, we need to have that flexibility, and that flexibility comes from that type of hybrid model. So you own, but you also need to go and reach and purchase.
Why do you think it is that way? Because if I just think your industry must be the oldest industry in the world, right? Because humans, it's the first thing that we did in 7000 BC was start growing things, right? What do you think it is? What do you think Michael Porter would say about why the supply chain is so much more complicated, I would say?
I think it's also the practice has been difficult to replace by technology. Talking really about agricultural practices, especially on these tropical fruits. They are very much labor intensive and they need to stay in a certain way like that. Of course, there's in any agricultural company, they have the same challenges that nobody wants to do agriculture in the future, right? No generation wants to do agriculture. And the tension is that basically there's a world food challenge, right? We have to feed so many billions of people in the future, and there's nobody that wants to do that, right? So technology needs to come in, and it will come in, but it's not the same business case when you try to maybe automate some of other practices like maybe apples versus bananas or pineapples that more sensitive products and have a different geometry and so on and so forth. So that's probably the first barrier that does not allow to use technology or to bring technology. The second barrier probably is all about product innovation in agriculture is a very long and expensive task, right? And you might say, well, Apple to the next Apple is not cheap either, right? But the problem is as well, the margins in agriculture are very tiny. So to defend a 20-year development program, pharma is one thing, a fruit is another thing. So that's probably the second barrier that makes it quite unique.
Interesting. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. And I guess the innovations that just come to mind for me in food, it seems to be a lot of it's like branding. Like I was just listening to this video by the CEO founder of this brand in the US that's called Liquid Death. They've grown incredibly. They've been valued over the course of just a few years, like 5 years they've been around. They're already valued at over $1 billion. They're a unicorn. And his thing was like this: we're going to take a product that is the same as everyone's product, water. All the water brands are kind of the same. And we're going to come up with this water, Liquid Death. It looks like a monster drink. It looks like tough, like you could go to a bar and order a can of Liquid Death. And it's fun. And he's completely like broken into this market, competing against Coca-Cola and Pepsi and the like.
Yeah. You see already, like, for example, in the US, it's a fantastic example in the apples and pears. It's probably the most boring category existing, right? In the supermarket, right? Apples and pears is a very functional type of product, right? But if you go to the supermarkets now in the US versus maybe 5 years ago, you will see an explosion of different varieties. So probably this is a 20-year breeding program that these companies have been doing, and I don't know how they've done it, but they have really created value through products. So I'm not saying it cannot be done, right? They have really expanded the shelf space through a category that you thought, there's nothing to be done in apples and pears. But, they have shows the same way. Other people, is some product side, other people have used, for example, other things that they own, right? Like that they would own. And I'm thinking of, for example, I'm not related, so I can name the product, but Tony Chocolonely, for example, in the Netherlands, they came in with completely different strategies. Is chocolate with no marketing spend, right? Let's say, or at least in the beginning, and no real product innovation. They in the beginning, they didn't even own a chocolate factory. And now they surpassed the typical, right? The Mondelez, the Nestle's of the world, and they're number one in the Netherlands. And they went through maybe a social media strategy, being disruptive and bold and so on, right? So typical overcrowded categories can still be disrupted. You need to think about what's your strategy.
My mind keeps going to how when we were preparing for this, that you thought of framing this up, which is Michael Porter's productivity frontier. I'd love for you to just like walk us through that. And it sounds like what we're talking about here is moving up and down that frontier. But now what we're going to talk about is how data can maybe change the frontier.
Yeah, well, I'm not an expert on the topic, not at all. And Porter has many different, let's say, layers of complexity in his models. But this one particularly I love. It's the typical thing that you learn when you are in supply chain, right? The closer you are to this productivity curve, which is a function of value and cost, right? So the higher you are in value, the lower you are in cost, you're closer to your most competitive advantage.
So on the y-axis, you have value. And on the x-axis, we have cost, position, relative. So when you move to the right, you're getting cheaper, better cost position to the right, but the value comes down. And then to move up in value, you usually have to move to the left. Relative cost position gets worse.
You have to move up. And in principle, you have at a higher cost, but then you come down.
Yeah, less cost competitive. That's the Ferrari, you know?
That's fair. And I think that the interesting bit of this model is that the closer you are to, of course, the optimum of the curve, the more competitive advantage you are. But this is eroded, right? Because, competitors get better, they get more efficient and so on. They copy, they improve technologies. And in principle, technologies have served to move that curve, let's say, push that curve and kind of reset the rules of the game.
More value at a lower cost.
And that has been traditionally the role of technology. And data, for me, it's also another technology example. And data has served us to get better, right? To understand our costs, to get sharper. The new technologies, AI and so forth, they have allowed us to create more complexity in our data set and reduce or improve that curve. The challenge of data is that, and this is a typical discussion with any chief commercial officer, is like, in the world of AI, how come we still do these things the same we do, right? Mm-hmm. The reality is that there's a lot of preparation that we need to do as an organizations to have AI-ready data to help us achieve the journey that we want to achieve. And that's painful because we have legacy systems, because everybody works in silos, because systems are not integrated. And so that's a very painful process, right? In any organization, some people are more ready, some people are less ready. But I think it's that journey that needs to happen to be able to create layers of data. The more layers you have, the more accurate you're going to be, and the more optimization on that cost and value you're going to get. Let's give an example. Maybe if you're a drinks producer, so one level is, let's say, you track everything around your production, and then you're able, for example, if you compare, let's say that this is a drinks company, and we have all the weather data in our, let's say, in all our markets, and we have our productivity data, and we understand where we are weak and where there's seasonality of the products. That's a layer that already there's an optimization component. Imagine if you add the maintenance data when you have your maybe weak points when it comes to failures in your operational activities. And maybe you also have consumer data, which are really the products that are preferred in a specific time of the year. So you can have your forecasting accuracy improve. You can add more and more layers to this, and then you can optimize more your value. In agriculture is a perfect example. And you can think it as an onion, perhaps. The core of the onion is really where the meat is, right? But the more layers and more layers and more layers create more structure. So maybe the core would be your agricultural practices, your yield, right? And the yield is a function perhaps of the fertilizer content and so on. But then you add more layers to your vision, like when you go to ophthalmologist, right? This is good, this is bad, this is good, this is bad. The more clear you can get, the better you're going to see. So you can add soil data, and then it tells you how weak your soil is or how you can improve the level of fertilizers that you really, really need and decrease the cost and increase your yield. But then maybe you can add weather data, and then you can maybe prevent that your fertilizer washed away because of the precipitation. And then you can add, for example, shipping data, you can add seasonality on your products, you can add consumer preferences, you can add anything you want.
Yeah, I see that. And I guess as more data becomes available, one person we interviewed on this podcast, he said, every time a customer moves, that's a new like button, because we can see everything they touch, everything they scroll. And now you could do that every time the product arrives at the port. It's all data. So I can see we've got this proliferation of data. And then we have the ability to kind of mash up these data sets. AI can kind of take unstructured data and kind of match it with, reasonable accuracy. So we have all these layers. Yeah.
And we can understand the correlations that we didn't understand before.
That's it.
I still remember there was one guy from an airport. He was the chief data officer of his airport in the UK. And he once told me, from the moment that you're looking for a plane, a flight that you're looking for, to the moment that you buy something at the airport, there's at least 40 data sets that I can access. Sometimes I don't even know what to do with that. But me as a chief data officer, I want it all.
Mm-hmm.
Because the more I have, the better opportunities I have to correlate, and the better opportunities I have to create value, to create products, and to create revenue streams.
Yes. What I thought was really interesting that you laid out these kind of two paths. As we have more of this data, we can make these correlations. You kind of have this choice. Do I use this to improve my core, or do I use this to create new offerings? Can you just walk us through those paths?
Yeah, and I think it's fantastic if you examine what other companies are doing. For example, if you're looking in agriculture, right? Those companies like Caterpillar or Deere, John Deere, for example. I mean, like they have created almost a complete new business units on data. They are very close to all agricultural practices, from land prep to harvesting. Any processes related to agriculture, they are present. And now what they call is a big buzzword, but what is now called, let's say, agriculture 4.0 or precision agriculture, it's all about sensors everywhere. Now it goes from drones to understand, for example, if there are some pest or disease, and computer vision to detect them, and then almost like chirurgically go to a specific part of the plot and fix it, to soil sensors, weather sensors, to moisture sensors, to everything, right? And they were able to understand the opportunities and the tensions, right? I mean, like in agricultural field, every penny counts. Things needs to automate, and things needs to create value very quickly. Yeah. So all of that turns into, well, I'm going to give you a platform for you to integrate all the data that you have. I'm going to give you a platform for you to take better decisions. I will capture for you. I will also create a product as a service. So CapEx, which is critical in agricultural business, I'm going to give you an OpEx component. So they've been really listening and capturing the value of this conversation, right?
Yeah. Tell us more about this as a service. I think you're already starting to talk about that next level, but I mean, just to bring that to life, right? We say that you could say, Netflix, all they did was offer entertainment as a service. They changed the unit of what they sold, and that disrupted this industry. For people who aren't thinking about the implications of as a service, could you illustrate that for us?
Yeah, for example, on John Deere, as I said, I mean, like in agriculture, I mean, a CapEx is cars. Cash is very important. So they were able to understand that all those services, including the traditional agricultural service, so really physical services like a tractor and things like that, you pay as a service. So you pay almost as an OpEx, an operational expense, instead of a real CapEx. And tractors, it costs millions. And for a farmer that, has a very limited amount of CapEx and really requires to get a very quick turnaround of their investments, this is fantastic news, right?
Yes. We've been looking at Deere and Company. Last 5 years, 5-year growth rate relative to the rest of the industry, they're in the 95th percentile. Last 5 years, growth rate of book value, 95%. Last 5 years, earnings per share growth relative to the industry, also 95%.
Wow.
Crazy.
And the funny thing is probably the data that they were able to commercialize is not their data. It's a farmer's data, but they understand. They're farmers too, probably. They're agronomists. They understand the value of that data. And probably, and this is maybe a bit sensitive, but as an aggregated value, nobody wants to understand the data, or nobody wants to know the data of that farmer in the US somewhere on strawberries. But aggregated data gives value to a lot of people.
It's more valuable aggregated than each person having their own individual data.
Yeah, they saw the value of that and created products around that.
Yeah, that does create this tension of, hey, you're using my data and it's enhancing your value, and now you're charging me for it. I'm sure there have been debates about what's fair.
I think this is the beauty, right? I mean, like they're also probably 100 years old companies, all of them, right? Yep. So, and they were disrupted. Some of them took the wave before and they were able to capture the most value, right? And they have competitive advantage. At the moment, they're all similar.
Yeah. All right. So we have this first path, which is gathering the data to improve your core product. And then I would say kind of the step out of that is you can take those improvements and you could monetize it differently. You could change monetization model from selling individual tractors to selling by mile. I imagine you could even, it sounds a little bit like also moving towards selling outcomes.
Yeah. I mean, like I think in the beginning, it's really like they're still in the comfort zone, right? I mean, keeping the same example of John Deere or Cat, this is about creating extra products that are supporting farmers to get the value the fastest they can. But then you say, well, now that I have all this data, let's say from a country, let's say some country in Central America like Honduras, because I have this penetration in all these areas, I have a very strong data set that can maybe serve for governments because I can provide productivity. So the data that I've aggregated, the data that I have access to is very valuable to completely different businesses.
Yeah.
And that I think is model B. You know, the other day I was taking a taxi in the UK, and in the UK, Waze is a mapping software. And let's say the penetration is massive because taxi drivers use it. The moment that the people that are really out there using it is really you are the leading design. So actually they are using the data almost as a platform for other things, right? So the taxi driver was passing by a specific area, and then it was already telling, you know, the Marks and Spencer combo cost of a sandwich and that because it was around lunchtime. So already created an opportunity for tailored messages to the driver. So it created a completely different business, right? It's not only about getting there faster, but it's also providing almost like a platform for advertisement and capturing data of roads. And then you can already talk to the municipality of London and say, well, this area requires better infrastructure because benchmark with other areas, you are the slowest on a specific area, right?
Yeah, no, this is opening up my mind. I love this. So in the first level, I'm using this data to improve what I'm delivering to my core customer, which is the driver, right? And now what you're talking about, that data now opens up opportunities for you to serve new customers, restaurants or shops that can pay you for advertising, or municipalities like the City of London that will pay you for information for like urban planning tools.
Yeah, absolutely. And the sky is the limit, right? Imagine that you're in a specific area, and then let's say you are BP or Shell or any other company that would sell petrol or electric companies. And you say, well, actually, there's an increase of taxi drivers, there's an increase of electric vehicles, and there's limited spaces for electric vehicles to charge. Or on the other side, there's too many electric opportunities. What can you do to increase the residence time of these people in there that can maybe provide more offerings? You know, you can be as creative as you can be.
It's amazing. Like any innovation, it does create some social, legal tensions. Like I think in the United States, I think it was an insurance company. I won't guess what the name is in case I get it wrong, but they got into a lot of legal trouble because they were selling driving information about drivers to third parties that their customers didn't give them permission to share.
On a specific level, this is a horrible thing to do.
Yeah.
On an aggregated level, you might say, what is my impact to investing in vaccines and drugs? And, you know, so then there's the other side of the coin. Right?
Yeah, I think MasterCard has had a big business in selling data, but not at the individual level, at the aggregated level. That's the way to do it ethically or appropriately.
Yes.
So you have these two different paths. How do you think a company, how should they think of them? Should they pursue both of them? Is it you do number one and then do number two? How do you decide whether to pursue applying it to your business or creating these new data products?
It all depends on how ready you are as an organization, right? Because already the tension is, if you call it A and B, A is the most easy to comprehend for an organization because it's all about almost as an adjacent service, right? Or an adjacent product line. So it is easier for me to understand that I can actually, you know, extend what I do, just getting better at what I do. Option B is then, wow, then I need to really create something completely different. Then perhaps the requirement is different, right? If I'm going to sell data or products to the government of California, just to say something, perhaps the requirement or the level that I have to be as an organization is completely different than doing this to my own stakeholders, my company. So, and for me, the difference is about developing technologies that help us to develop products, right? Because products, then you really need to compete with other type of companies that are maybe specialists, right? That new competitors that you didn't know you had. So it comes back to how ready are you going to be?
What do you mean by be ready? I mean, as a mindset, or you think you have to have new roles, you need to have new orgs? What goes into being ready?
I would say all of the above. Why? Because basically, already as a mindset shift, people need to understand the interrelationship, if it's a word, of data, right? So if I'm in finance and I produce a lot of reports, I need to understand that these reports are not only useful for the senior manager, but perhaps for the supply chain. This is a very simple example. It happens like that. But I need to make sure that my data is usable in the most purest form to the whole organization. And then as an organization, we need to be ready to have the architecture to host that data in the best possible way. We also need to have our systems that break up those silos, that are integrated in the most possible way. And I'm talking about ERPs, consumer systems. I'm talking about operational systems, anything that you can think of. And I'm talking about the Excel sheets of people, the non-structured data like pictures that are important, your PDFs, anything that you can produce. It doesn't matter where you are or which part of the organization, it is valuable. So that's a mindset.
You just briefly mentioned the silos, and I can imagine that being a big issue, is that even if you do that, you might have one division or one business unit not sharing the data with another business unit. And so you're not being able to make these correlations that are required.
Not sharing or not having the empathy about how the data can be used, or at least the understanding of the data can be used. And sometimes organizations do not talk within the silos. They do not talk. They don't understand that perhaps this type of data very much downstream will serve in a better way, in a different format, in a different time frame. That's probably the role of the data organization, right? To create order into the chaos that organizations are used to. And I think, listening to the podcast that we talked about the professor from IND,
Mohan Subramaniam,
he said something really, really that I loved. He said, traditional organizations have used data to support making their products. The future is all about products will support the creation of data.
Wow. Yeah.
I thought it was super insightful. I'm going to take it as a mantra for my day today. I think that's it. And it's difficult because if I am a person and I'm measured by yield, my harvest in time and so on, why do I have to think about creating the specific data sets, I don't know, that I could sell to my competitors at some point in time? It's difficult. I mean, I am measured under my specific role, and that's a shift.
Just sort of bring it to life, I guess, like I'm thinking that apple that you help bring along from the farm to the processing to the package shipping to this. What if your product wasn't the apple? The apple was a vehicle to collect data across the supply chain.
Absolutely. I think it's an incredible mindset.
Amazing. What do you think a strategy officer or leader inside a company should do to start preparing their company for this kind of transformation?
Transformation is not anymore like a project management thing. It's a series of steps and so on. So it's almost like a pulse. I think transformation is almost like a continuous element, right? It's a mind setup to say, well, I need to continuously push that curve forward.
Yes.
And therefore, there's probably not a magic solution to this. But as a strategy officer, I think helping that cultural shift, not only in data, but in all the challenges that we face, being tariffs or whatever it is, nothing is linear anymore. So it's a constant push. So that would be, I would say, the first implication to the strategy officer. And I think the second implication for the strategy officer is that what are we doing with data? Are we covered? Do we have a data organization in place? Do I see data as a risk? Meaning that, do I see competitors get smarter? Because if we're having the conversation, you and I, there will be other people in your competitors having that conversation.
Sure.
There's nothing unique about this, right? It's all about opportunity and a good business case and a good driver. Strategy officers need to think about where are we and where do we want to be, right? I mean, where do we want to be? Do we want to be A or B? Do we set up the journey for B, or we are happy with A?
That is a great point. Yeah. It's sort of like, do we open up the B avenue and start exploring these data products and be ready for that? And probably making that choice now has implications for how you pursue A as well.
Yeah. And there's also timings, right? I mean, maybe you're pushing the organization too far, and A can create commercial opportunities that is not only about new products, but maybe strategic alliances, or maybe better commercial agreements with your customers, with your partners, with your suppliers. Innovation is always a teamwork. So this is where all these brains can really create value together.
Yeah. What do you suggest as a next step for a strategy officer? Like, I'm thinking I can look at our company, Outthinker, or any company and ask, what if this whole company was going to become a B company and it was just a machine to create data? What business would we be in? You know, Peter Drucker says strategy is the answer to the question, what business are we really in? And it's never easy to answer that question. I think you're proposing industries-wide rethinking of what business we're in. What do you suggest a strategy officer do next? Maybe that is, what can they do to learn and get their head around it, or maybe do the real practical things of laying out a transformation plan? What would you suggest a listener do next?
If there's somebody that has the mindset to challenge the status quo, is a strategy officer, right? And I don't want to glorify the strategy officer or reduce the impact of any other leader in the organization, because they might have the same type of thinking. But the strategy officer, a lot of the times, owns that methodology, owns that platform to create those discussions with senior leaders. And it's also the glue that can bind all these people together, right? The chief supply officer or the chief operating officer is really thinking about their own strategic goals and so on. Of course, there's the company goals, but how do you actually make sure that the marketing officer, the commercial officer, the operating officer can actually come together to say, well, actually, our business model needs to shift towards that direction. I need to kind of dedicate certain time of what I do that is a very busy schedule to make sure that I do the month, the year, the budget, and so on and so forth. But I still invest certain time of my people and my organization to think about that journey, to support the organization moving forward, right? It's always the balance. I think the strategy officer owns that platform.
Mm-hmm. And has that responsibility. That's the big part of the role. Claudio, thank you for starting this conversation. There's so many different paths to think about. What's that final thought that you would like to leave us with to give us the focus to continue the journey?
I think, which is also a reflection of my own journey. I think we need to treat organization, or at least let's say the core activity of the organization, as fluid. That disruption is far away from being linear, and we need to be ready. And we need to have that kind of elastic mindset to take that opportunity when the opportunity is really an opportunity and it's not about catching up.
Yes. Thank you, Claudio, for being here and for doing this thinking and sharing it with us. It was great to have you on the podcast.
Many thanks.
Thank you to Claudio for taking the time to chat with us today, and thank you for listening to the Chief Strategy Officer podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. To learn more about how CSOs use Outthinker to accelerate their impact, visit outthinker.com. Until next time, keep widening your aperture, pushing the productivity frontier, and rethinking the business you're really in.